All right. So for our second topic, speaking of not having the brain power for something, this is a doozy. The Atlantic just published what I would consider one of the most comprehensive deep dives into OpenAI, Sam Altman, their history, where the company stands today, and where it's going. And this is all kind of underpinned by several in-depth interviews with Sam Altman, the CEO, co-founder, creator of OpenAI. Somewhat worryingly, the article is titled, Does Sam Altman Know What He is Creating? And it looks at how OpenAI kind of went from near failure many years ago, trying to kind of develop the initial models, GPT model, to getting to things like GPT-4, which Altman actually described to a reporter as a quote, alien intelligence. Now, this article is really long and has a lot of different points to it that we're going to get into, but it is well worth reading in full. We'll link to it in the show notes, but
And you do
some of
need a subscription, by the way, to The
yes.
Atlantic, but honestly, if you can get a monthly subscription, I would pay for it just to read this article.
Yes.
I think they have a free trial as well. So whatever you need to do, you have to read this article for yourself.
And some of the things that stood out, and Paul, I know you had a lot of other things that also stood out to you, is that, it's pretty clear that Altman, despite knowing and acknowledging there's risks and safety measures needed to kind of shepherd forward responsible AI, believes that advanced AI is not stopping and is going to usher in a golden age. However, that golden age is going to potentially be built on pretty serious disruption because Altman readily admits in this article he does not know how powerful AI will become or what that will even mean to your average person. And he had this kind of standout quote that said, quote, a lot of people working on AI pretend it's only going to be good. It's only going to be a supplement. No one is ever going to be replaced. Jobs are definitely going to go away, full stop. However, somewhat paradoxically, he does note that, better jobs will fill their place. And he has also at the same time kind of advocated for possibly pursuing universal basic income, UBI measures, basically giving people a set amount of income to even out economic disruption if there's mass unemployment due to AI. But what really they get to throughout this kind of wide ranging interview and exploration of OpenAI is their work towards AGI, artificial general intelligence. And there are a lot of quotes in here, Paul. I know a lot of these jumped out to you that really just show Altman taking 110% seriously the arrival of AGI, the arrival of potentially, you know, better than human artificial intelligence across a range of functions, and that happening relatively soon. So, Paul, first off, as you're reading this, and I'll kind of let you just take and run with
Mm.
what jumped out to you, how much of this was like, this seems like what Altman and OpenAI appear to actually believe versus kind of a PR move, right? Or did you see it another way?
I don't think this is a PR move.
Okay.
Um, no, it's a disturbing article. I mean, honestly, like we probably are closer to this stuff than most. Read pretty much every interview Altman's ever done. Read pretty much everything you can read on these topics. Um, I'll say, like, during Ethan Mollick's fireside chat at MACON, he said if you haven't lost at least 3 nights of sleep, you don't properly understand AI, like what's going on. I may lose 3 nights of sleep this week because of this article. Like it changed me. Like it's really hard to explain this, but like when I read, there's been like, I don't know, a handful of moments over the last 12 plus years I've been studying AI where I just looked at everything differently. This article is one of those. So the last time it happened was probably when I read Genius Makers in 2021 and I sold my agency because of that book. Like, just like I have to go all in on all of this. Um, I don't know what exactly the outcomes are of this for me, but I definitely look at AI in the future differently after reading this interview and kind of the summary of what's going on. Um, there's a few things, like, we can dig into some specific, but there's a few things I noted as just highlights. And I just read this morning. I saw this last week. It's in the September issue of The Atlantic, so it's not in print yet, but you can get it digitally. So I read it through Apple News, which I have a subscription for. Um, so I did not read it last week during MACON. I was like, I can't do this. I read the first two paragraphs and I thought, I can't go here right now. So I went there this morning. Okay. So one, it starts off with that they have something they can't release. So the opening paragraph, like the lead says, on a Monday morning in April, Sam Altman sat inside OpenAI's San Francisco headquarters telling me about a dangerous artificial intelligence that his company had built but would never release. His employees, he later said, often lose sleep worrying about the AIs they might one day release without fully appreciating their dangers. He did come back around, the author went back around to that idea of this thing they wouldn't release later on, but they did not get into details. You're kind of left theorizing what that could be, which I do have some theories that I probably won't get into right now. So they have something way more powerful. They have said before they're not training GPT-5, but they also say they could be doing a training run at any moment. So I think it's specifically Altman insisted that they had not yet begun GPT-5's training run. But when I visited OpenAI's headquarters, both he and his researchers made it clear in 10 different ways that they pray to the god of scale. They want to keep going bigger to see where this paradigm leads. After all, Google isn't slacking its pace. It seems like likely to unveil Gemini, a GPT-4 competitor, within months. We are basically always prepping for a run, the OpenAI researcher told me. So they're not just sitting around with GPT-4 out in the wild and not doing things. There's other stuff going on. The impact on knowledge work, which we'll come back around to. There was a concept in here that started disturbing me that I hadn't thought a lot about, but they talked about AI agents as an autonomous corporation. And I got to find that passage because I think it's important to understand what they're talking about. The basic premise is that once you build these like AGIs or super intelligent agents, that they can start to work together. And once they do that, they actually start to function more like an autonomous corporation than individual AI agents.
Hmm.
And so when you start to think about it in those terms, it starts to you start to realize why the fears exist. Like I think that was part of what really struck me about this article is we've talked a lot about, the Future of Life Institute letter and these fears about existential risk to humanity and da da da. This was the first article I read where I actually saw how they were connecting those dots, where I actually understood the fears that Jeff Hinton and these other people have and why they may be nearer term than we thought or that's been previously discussed. So let's see, actively develop a true agency. We're not talking about we're talking about autonomous. Okay, here's Sutskever, who's Ilya Sutskever is one of the co-founders and also one of the Jeff Hinton's proteges from 2011 we've talked about before. I think he's the chief science officer or something at OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about GPT-4. We're talking about an autonomous corporation, said Sutskever. Its constituent AIs would work and communicate at high speed like bees in a hive. In a single such AI organization, would be as powerful as 50 Apples or Googles, he mused. This is incredible, tremendous, unbelievably disruptive power. Then went on to say, presume for a moment that human society ought to abide the idea of autonomous AI corporations. We had better get their founding charters just right. What goals should we give an autonomous hive of AIs that can plan on century-long time horizons, optimizing billions of consecutive decisions toward an objective that is written into their very being? That was when I was like, I got to stop for a minute. Like I just had to kind of get up and process these ideas because again, the article goes into great depth of actually providing examples of how this stuff happens and why they think it could happen. They talked extensively about the red teaming that occurred for GPT-4, which is the safety and alignment testing it went through before they released it in March of 2023. It was one of the first times I've read about specific examples of what that red team unearthed within GPT-4, sort of these emergent capabilities it demonstrated that they weren't prepared for and that they had to guardrail in, which then led me to like, oh my gosh, like they're not guardrailing this in the open source models. So yeah, we always have this debate of closed versus open source. And,
Right.
you unveil what they were saying in this article, GPT-4 could do before they neutered it. So it couldn't do it. And you realize like, oh, wow, these open source models can do that right now. So that affected me a little bit. And then, I think, I think more than anything, I took away that they aren't slowing down, they're speeding up. And no matter what they say about wanting regulations and laws, they clearly don't actually want them. Like they talked about the idea that Altman said something related to like a democratic society wouldn't want to slow down. You don't want this in the hands of autocratic communist societies. So like you have to keep going. So there's definitely that like talking out of both sides of their mouth. But oh yeah, we want regulation. But what they really want is to control the regulation and
Mm.
to influence, the direction this research goes, and to convince the government that they should let them keep going, or else the other countries will get aligned with this. Um, so that affected me a little bit, and then I think I just walked away with a deeper understanding of the importance of alignment and the safety research that's going on. Um, it's a lot, but I do think it might affect what I do next, what we do next, in some profound ways. And I won't get into that right now. I have some
Mm.
thoughts about what that has to be, but I don't know that we're doing enough with just talking about responsible AI and ethics and safety and some talks at Macon. I don't think that's going to be sufficient. I think we're going to have to probably do more. Um, and this article gave me a sense of urgency for that.
So one of the things, obviously we're getting into some pretty deep in the weeds topics that are definitely important. But one of the things that really jumped out to me is like, oh, shoot, okay, here's some real urgency to this is when Altman talks about very starkly, many jobs will go away, full
Hmm.
stop. What did you make of that take? Because we have talked about the impact on knowledge work, but I did find it interesting. He just readily admitted that. I suspected for a while he believed it. But just hearing him say it, I think, was like, oh man, okay, we got to start preparing now.
Yeah, I've heard him say that before.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, we've said it on this show. I think I said it on stage at Macon. Like, I think we're being unrealistic if we pretend like this isn't going to affect things. And you go back to the thing you quoted from my opening keynote about the least capable AI you'll ever use.
Hmm.
This article makes that come to life. Like you quickly realize that there is just way more powerful versions of what already exists that weren't released onto the world. They're training more advanced models that are trained on images, on video, on audio, on code. Right now, these models we use were trained on text. Like that's it. So its understanding of the world, its ability to reason, its ability to write, its ability to do all these things is largely based on text training. Once it can see and understand images, which it can already, they're already training it. Bard is able to do this now. You give it an image, it interprets what's in the image and can analyze it for you. So you can see that. Now do the same thing with video and audio and code. And you start to give it the representation of the world around it. And then they talk in this article about embodying that they want this in humanoid robots and they want it in robotics.
Mm.
Just last week, DeepMind, I think, put out an article that they're using language models to train robotic arms that to develop more intelligence within these robotics. So it just again, like we don't want this to be overwhelming and stray too far from marketing and business, but this is real. Like you have to understand what they're actually building, because the implications on, is it going to affect jobs? If we sit here and say, listen, there's millions of knowledge work jobs at risk next year,
Hmm.
you could have somebody come back and be like, oh, you're so full of it. That is not true. It's just fear mongering. No, it's not. Like if you actually understand what they're building and what these things are capable of, it's almost irresponsible to not plan for that to happen,
Hmm.
because it's at this point, it's getting to where I know we're going to talk about the McKinsey generative AI report in a minute, but I'm starting to feel like the probability is greater that there's a massive impact on jobs in the next like 2 to 3 years than not. And I felt like it was like 50-50 before. Um, but when you read stuff like this, it just affects the way you think about these things. And I still think that the people who are willing to sort of like just absorb this, have the sleepless night over it, and then wake up and start saying, okay, what do we do about this? And that
Hmm.
was the theme I kept saying throughout Macon, is like, this isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be clean. There's going to be disruptions. There's going to be hard for people. But as soon as we can get through that and just accept that this is not, there's an uncertain future ahead, and we all start working in the same direction to do this responsibly with humans at the center of it, it gives us the best possible outcome. If we ignore it and pretend like this isn't happening and there aren't way more advanced models already in these research labs, then you got problems.
Hmm.
And so I think that's one of the big things we try and do at the show. What we try and do with things is by never fearmonger, never like overhype what's going on. This is just reality. And we just need more people thinking about this critically and what does it mean and how's it going to impact your career, organizations, whatever it is, because it's going to be challenging. Um, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's an important topic. Like I said, I don't want to go too far outside of the boundaries of marketing and business and education, but I really think that the next 2 to 3 years is going to be way more disruptive than people think it is.